This
And so
conference will now be recorded.
and
Sure.
so at the perfect timing, because I'm about to shut up, I'm just so pleased to introduce to you Jay to give you his perspective on the redistricting amendment and why we should be voting no here in Arlington. So without further ado, Jay, thank you so much for agreeing to do this,
Yeah,
and the floor is yours.
of course. Well, thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to drop in for a little while and talk to you about the redistricting amendment. I was happy enough to be able to join the ACDC chili cook-off yesterday, and again, the food sounds delicious. And hopefully, we can get back and do it in person again next year. But before I start, I want to say you guys have one of the best delegates in the General Assembly, in Patrick Hope. He's someone who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years serving together, and he's someone who I rely on. He's someone who I look to for advice, and he's someone who really knows the ins and outs of what's happening and how to get things done. You know, I sit in the corner of the floor with Mike Mullen and Jeff Bourne, who are from Newport News and Richmond, respectively, and it seems like every time we are on the floor, Patrick has bill after bill after bill that he's presenting on second read uncontested, because all the things that he does, he's able to do and get those things through with not a lot of opposition. And he does take on the tough battles too. And so I'm happy to call Patrick a friend, and I was glad that he put me in this position to talk to you guys about the redistricting amendment. And so I'll get right into that, because I think this is a really sort of important issue. It's something that's been debated on a lot, up and down. We talked about it last year in the General Assembly. We talked about it this year in the General Assembly. There is, campaigns on both sides, yes, no. And I will tell you guys why I got to no. And hopefully, if you guys want to ask any questions, we can do that. But, even when I ran 3.5 years ago, I told every single one of my constituents who would listen, I said, look, I think the redistricting process is broken. I think we need a new way to do things here in Virginia. And at that point, One Virginia 2021 was the sort of, preemptive body in Virginia talking about the best way forward. And their plan at that point was something that I supported, and I think Patrick did too, because I think we can all agree that we want independent and nonpartisan redistricting. We don't want people like me or Patrick involved in this process, because even though we are of the true heart, things change when you get behind those closed doors. And so we were all really excited to have the opportunity to vote on a proposal that would bring about true independent and nonpartisan redistricting reform. Along the way, things changed a little bit, and things that were concerning to me sort of bubbled up to the top. One, there weren't a lot of voices at the table who were people of color, who were younger people, who really have a stake in this just as much as everybody else. And two, it seemed like the process was being rushed. And I know that we want an amendment because that's the most permanent thing we can do. But if, to pass an amendment, as you guys know, you've got to pass it in 1 year, have an intervening election, pass it another year, and then it goes to the voters. It's a very difficult thing to do because you can't change it at all. And if you'll recall 2 years ago, when we were presented with this most recent iteration, and I'll never forget it, and we were sitting in caucus. Patrick, I think it was like a Thursday night or a Friday night, because we were about to go home. And it was, I guess, the byproduct of some negotiations that had taken place behind the scenes. I think the negotiations for this particular amendment are indicative of what you don't want in the first place, which is behind the scenes, non-transparent negotiations to bring this thing to the table. And I voted against it the first year. I think I was one of 13 people to do so, and I did that for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't have a lot of time to look it over. Two, I didn't think that there were the right voices at the table to talk about it. And three, and this is sort of my broader point when we get to it, when you're talking about amending the Constitution of Virginia, you've got to be sure that this thing is perfect. It's one thing to put in a bill, have a bill pass, it's not great. We can come back the next year and fix it, or the year after that, or the year after that. If we do an amendment, it is incredibly hard to get that stuff out of the Constitution of Virginia. So if you're going to do it, it better be perfect. And this, to me, wasn't perfect from a mechanic standpoint, because you've got politicians in the process. You've got 8 of us of 16. And as John Scott, who is our colleague who's from Portsmouth, so eloquently said, he said, look, I have to kiss up to a lot of people in Richmond to get my stuff done. Now I got to kiss up to the Speaker and the Majority Leader of the Senate and all these other people who, frankly, and I love our Speaker dearly and our other Democratic representation, but there is no check to say who can be on it and who can't. You could put yourself on there if you want to. And then the other issue for me that was really troubling is that only 2 people can say no, and it kicks it to the Supreme Court of Virginia. Now, I have a little bit more faith in the Supreme Court of Virginia than my colleagues do, some of whom said that it's appointed by all Republicans, and that's true. However, I do think that they're good jurists at heart, because they would have to pick a special master to do that. But I think what's even more troubling is that there's no gubernatorial involvement, right? There's no checks and balances here, and we don't want the court being that ultimate arbiter. I'd rather have the governor veto it and then it goes to the court. I think there's an intermediate step that's missing. But most importantly, the process as it is being put to you is neither independent nor is it nonpartisan. And that, to me, is not doing what we promised that we were going to do for you guys. And that's why I'm a no. I also am concerned about the lack of firm commitment in the amendment to having people of color and geographic diversity at the table on that commission. They said we could do it by legislation, but like I just said, you can undo that legislation pretty quickly. So let me paint a picture for you. Let's say this amendment passes and we pass a bill that says you've got to have half of the commission be from non-metropolitan areas, and you got to have half the commission be people of color, and you got to have half the commission be women. That's great for the 2031 redistricting cycle, right, or the 2021 redistricting cycle. But let's say that Democrats, who are the party of the people, we are the party of diversity. This party was built on the backs of people of color and women. Let's say we lose control. What is to stop the Republicans, who are far more vicious political creatures than we will ever be, from undoing that bill and putting all of their people on there and ramrodding something through? I will tell you that I have a lot of respect for the folks who are advocates for nonpartisan independent redistricting. This isn't it, and I think that, frankly, people panicked, and we realized that this was, in 2019, was the last chance to get something on the ballot, or at least try to get something on the ballot before the next redistricting process. And that's why we got where we were, is we rushed, we panicked, we went too fast with something that is as sacred as the Constitution, and I don't think you can do that. To me, frankly, personally, if we're going to do something in the Constitution, it better be absolutely correct. Think about this, and again, to put something in the Constitution, it's really hard. To get it out, it's even harder. Did you guys know that the prohibition on marriage between a man and two same-sex couples is in the Constitution still, even though it's not the rule of law? It's still there. And I guarantee you that there would be people who would vote against repealing that if we brought that back as a bill this year and the next year. So that's the sort of context you think about and the heavy stuff that we're working with. And so for me, it was an easy vote to vote no last year. It was an easy vote to vote no this year. I am disappointed that some of our colleagues chose not to, I think, listen to some of the voices in the room about sort of minority representation. I have been sort of very vocal about the lack of Black voices at the table and the lack of protections that are afforded to people of color under this amendment. And I think now, as we are in this moment here in Virginia and across this Commonwealth, where we're talking about our history with race and we're talking about how we can do better, to me, this amendment represents a step back. And I will encourage all of you guys to vote no. I'll encourage you all to tell your family and friends to vote no, because we can come back next year and do this and do it right and do it well and do it properly and have it in place for 2031, because we will have legislation that will guide us for 2021 that's going to be great. It bans gerrymandering, it bans sort of packing particular districts. And I say this from a place where I represent one of those districts that was at issue in the court case that got us here in the first place. The 89th district in Norfolk was 57% Black, which is too much. And it's been taken down to about 53 or 54. And people say, well, this is about your self-interest. It's not. I don't plan on being in the General Assembly for the rest of my life. I really do enjoy it, but I think that I have other areas where I can offer more and do more. And so I'm on my way out. But this is more about the people who come after me, the voices that come after me, and making sure that the House of Delegates and the General Assembly broadly reflects the voices of Virginia. And this, to me, will take us backward. It'll set us on a course where we are stifling those voices. And so I couldn't in good faith support it. And so I'm happy that I think 30-something of our colleagues joined us in flipping and changing their vote. But hopefully we can get enough to put this thing down on November 3rd. So with that, I'll stop talking. I'm happy to answer any questions, because I do think it's worth having a dialogue about this if we've got time, because this is truly going to be one of the most important votes on a constitutional amendment we're taking probably in the next 5, 10, 20 years.
I have two comments, one comment and then two questions. I'll lead off for us. And I want to remind everybody on the call that ACDC has taken a official position on this amendment, which is to vote no. And so when we put out our sample ballot, there'll be a check mark on the no box, and that's the official ACDC position. And I have two questions. The first one is, you mentioned special masters. I want you to talk more about that, because it sounds like you feel it's a foregone conclusion that's what the Supreme Court would do. To my knowledge, there is no requirement. And second of all, even if there was a special master, there'd be no requirement of the special master being particularly nonpartisan. I mean, you can imagine the court appointing William Barr to be the special master. So that's
exactly. So thank you for your comments, Bob.
Could I make one final question?
Sure,
which is,
sure.
One thing that Democrats, and particularly the Congressional Black Caucus, have really pushed on is restructuring and reauthorizing the Voters' Rights Act. We used to have Virginia be one of the prior approval states. Assume hypothetically for a minute that we went back to the days when there was a Voting Rights Act with teeth, and there were prior approval provisions in that hypothetical Voting Rights Act. How would a redistricting amendment and a redistricting, nonpartisan redistricting process mesh with a federal Voting Rights Act that had teeth? Those are my two questions: special masters and Voting Rights Act. Thank you.
No, thank you, Bob. Those are great points. And so the first thing I'll say about the special master is you're right. And so what troubles me about this is that we are asking you guys to trust us even more under a scenario where you don't trust us at all. You're hoping and appealing to people's better angels in this process because we didn't put any of these things in the amendment. And you're hoping that we will come and backstop that with legislation, which is great. Now it might be because Democrats are in charge, but who knows when things switch and who knows how things change. And again, you're relying on these legislators in this process, which is exactly what nobody really wants. But we are more involved almost in this than we were before. And so, especially because there's no gubernatorial check, right, where the governor can say, I don't agree with this, right? You guys didn't do X, you guys didn't do Y. And so to me, that's very, very troubling. Again, I trust myself, I trust Patrick. I'm not sure I trust the other 98 people who might be involved in that mix, or 100 or 138, to do the right thing. And so, without the guidance as it relates to who they should pick or what, or who's going to be on the commission, you could have Bill Barr on the commission if he wants. I mean, I'm sure you guys know this, but he's like a resident of Irvington, Virginia. He's here all the time. He goes down to the Middle Peninsula, so he in theory could be on the panel, and he could be one of those two voices who says, I don't like this map. Let's kick it to the courts where we know that we are going to have a better opportunity to get lines that are more favorable for us. Let's also not forget that for years, Republicans had an opportunity to reform this process and they never did, until now, when they saw that they were losing ground, things were slipping, the tides were turning. And I think I called him out on the floor, and Patrick can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are people who have voted against these things and privileges in elections year after year after year after year, and then turn on and voted for this. And it wasn't because they thought this process was so much better. It was because they're trying to preserve themselves. And that's the problem with this thing, is that, and that was the biggest red flag to me, was that when all Republicans voted for this, after 20 years of having chances to do something they never did, that's the biggest red flag. And I say this in caucus a lot, and I try to be bipartisan, and I try to work across the aisle in places where I can, but generally, I will stand up and say that those people are not our friends, right? They don't want the same things that we do. They want to imbue themselves with power and do it for years and years and years, and they saw that their empire was crumbling, and this is their way back. And that's why they're on board with this, and that's why, one of the reasons why I'm not. To talk about the Voting Rights Act, we had a Virginia Voting Rights Act that Delegate Van Valkenburg put in this year that unfortunately didn't get through the Senate, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense in my mind when the Voting Rights Act has been gutted, because now you can effectively do whatever you want, right? I remember in law school when Shelby County v. Holder came out, the decision came out, and being so crushed because it basically had undone all of these landmark achievements in the Voting Rights Act as it related to preclearance for states like Virginia that have an insidious history of racism, have an insidious history of drawing districts that are going to preserve white majorities in the legislative bodies. And so, again, this is troublesome. This is scary. This is important stuff. And I know you guys call yourself seniors, but you guys all look very young. But this is something that's going to be on the books and potentially for generations after we are gone. And that, to me, is scary, not just for my children. And frankly, I hope my children don't go into politics. I'd like for them to go do something else and be successful as a scientist or a doctor or whatever. But if they do, I worry about the landscape that they're stepping into because it's going to be sort of cooked from the start. And frankly, you know, I don't sleep well at night because of Donald Trump, because of the Republicans in the House of Delegates and in the Senate of Virginia. But I really don't sleep well at night because this is looming and this is so important. And so we've got to lend our voices to a chorus to say, hey, this isn't the right course. We can do better. And I mentioned it a little earlier, but one of the first things I learned when I got to the General Assembly, when you're talking about your legislation and your bills, they say, well, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. They say, look, if it's not perfect, it's okay. We'll get it done. We'll come back. We'll fix it the next year or the year after that. With an amendment, you only get one bite at the apple. And, you know, we are, I think, right now chewing that bite of the apple. And to vote yes would be to swallow that apple. And, you know, that apple's rotten. And so we have a chance on November 3rd to spit that apple out, go get a better one, and start anew.
Craig, do you have a question?
Thanks. Jay, I think you're too kind to the court angle. There is nothing in the amendment, nor do I think there can be anything in a perfecting amendment or guidelines or anything, because the amendment flatly says if it goes to the court, quote, the court shall establish the districts. It's in the Constitution. It would be.
Yeah.
And they don't and I don't think any guidelines can change that. There's nothing about a special master. Hell, Ken Cuccinelli, he's got his big right-hand guy on there. He could be in the back room with a pencil and a map.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I like to believe that people come into public service wanting to do right by people, right, and wanting to engage in this debate and in this debate. But I think especially in the last 20 or 30 years, and only Democrats, frankly, would unilaterally disarm in a way that we're seeing right now.
We do it all the time.
We do it all the time. And we worked so hard in 2017 to make those gains, right, to get Ralph Northam elected, to have him as the backstop, right, on the redistricting process. And we worked so hard, right, Patrick, myself, you know, all of us, just campaigning, raising money, stumping for people to flip the House and the Senate, and we did it. And only Democrats would have a trifecta and then tie our hands behind our back going forward. There is no doubt in my mind that if the shoes were on the other feet, right, if the shoes was on their foot, Republicans would not have done this. They might have voted for it, and then if they had kept their power, they'd say, well, we'll figure this out, right? Yep. They would have walked away. And frankly, I was a little disappointed because we could have walked away, and it would have been a story for a week. The people would have said, oh, the Democrats didn't keep their promise. And then we would have got down to business, and we would have, you know, done some great stuff, and it would have pushed that story away. But now we let it fester. And so now it looks like this Dem on Dem warfare. But in reality, this is the Republicans' greatest dream. Greatest dream. The Democrats will take the power away from themselves and effectively let them back into the game. And that's not to say that if we draw the maps ourselves in 2021, if the amendment dies, yeah, we're going to draw it to our advantage, right? And frankly, you guys don't know me that well, but my father was in the House of Delegates for 15 years, so I lived through a couple of redistricting cycles through him. And, you know, I sort of learned at the knees of Dickie Cranwell and Ward Armstrong and Billy Robinson and Ken Melvin and some of these other guys. And, you know, they said, what the hell are you guys doing? I mean, and they still can't believe it. And so, you know, my fear is that we have sort of let ability to sort of see the forest through the trees go.
Well, we've
I'd
let
like to-
we've
go
let
ahead.
Virginia 2021 try to guilt trip us, and we need to. And they talk about transparency, and that is the least transparent of any major force right now. We don't know where. Well, unfortunately, we do know where some of the money comes from. $250,000 from from an ex-Enron guy in Houston.
Well, and look, Republicans have been very, very open. Ed Gillespie, right, was the architect of the Red Map project. This is what they do, and they find ways to undercut us and make us think that we're doing right, and they're sort of pulling the wool over our eyes. And I was shocked that, and I said this on the floor, and some of my other colleagues said it too, that when every member of the Republican caucus voted for this, that was your red flag. And
Thank you.
And frankly, the Senate is a little bit different. Their enemy is not each other; it's the House, frankly. And you're seeing that play out right in this process. But I think that the same thing holds true, over there. But again, we as House members are closer to the people. We represent about 80,000 people each, and when you've got almost half of us saying this is a bad idea, I think I'm hopeful that if we can get the message out and get the message right, that we can be successful in putting this thing down. But it's scary.
I'd just like to add that although I respect your father, I would point out that the redistricting processes he lived through were before the era of big data and really heavy analytics. And right now, we can micro target with vicious precision districts if we really wanted to draw a map in a partisan way.
And one of my fears, right? One of the things that we take into account now is where we all live, and that's okay. But you could also see a scenario in which 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of the House are drawn into one particular district. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but a special master, the Republicans, they don't care. They're going to enjoy that, right? For us, I don't want to lose people like Patrick and Alfonso and Paul Krizek and those guys, because they get it. And frankly, this stuff isn't worth moving around for, but that's just me. But there's just a lot of layers that are missing in this process, and you're leaving a little bit too much to chance.
Okay.
But I saw Pat had a question, so I want to make sure.
Pat McGrady, please go ahead.
Unmute. Hello. Yes, my story is very much like yours, where I started off being a big 2021 supporter. In fact, I live at Greenspring, and I was a representative for them on the campus at Greenspring. And then last November at the League of Women Voters Forum, where Mark Levine dropped his bombshell about being against it, I have come the same path that you have, I think. But I'm still very worried about all the people that haven't realized that there are two sides to this argument. Anyway, I have 2 questions, if I may. Sure. One is, what would your alternative be? What would you propose to do the redistricting in place of the amendment? Number 2 is, how can you explain that all of the delegates are against it and all the senators from Northern Virginia are for it, as well as the Black Caucus, I understand. So those are my 2 questions.
All right, so I'll take them in turn. The first one, I would love to see us get a process that bans gerrymandering, right? Political gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering. I would like to see us have a commission that has no politicians at all, but has gender, racial, and geographic diversity, right? I'll leave that to you to figure out how you want to do it. You can do it based on population density at the time. You can do it based on congressional districts. I think there's a whole host of ways that we can do it, but I don't want to be in it. And I don't think we need any of us in it, because if we're in the room, you're tempted to do something that's for your interests as opposed to the people. I think that's been proven over the course of time. I will also tell you that I appreciate your position on 1 Virginia 21. I supported that stuff too. I think that they got scared, they panicked, that they had to justify their existence to their donors and to their supporters and get something. And as opposed to coming to you with a nice platter of reforms, they came to you with like a sort of day-old fish dish. And I said, well, just take it, hold your nose and eat it. But I think you can explain the House-Senate divide a little bit by personality, but also by sort of aim and goal. And you think about and I'll take the Black Caucus first. Every Black Caucus member -1 voted against the amendment. Sam Razul is a member of the Black Caucus. He voted for it. That's his thing. The Senate, they all voted for it. And I don't want to take away from anybody, but I think one person who voted for it wants to run for higher office, and they want to use this as a feather in their cap. The other Black Caucus members are older folks who probably don't care, and they see this as the right thing to do, but they don't have to deal with this after this because they're not coming back, right? They're older, they're not going to, they might run for one more term, but they're not going to be through the next thing. And I think it's just a matter of whether you want to dig into it or not. I mean, I will tell you, redistricting is not my forte. This is not what I came into the House of Delegates talking about. It's not what I came into the House of Delegates planning to have as my passion. I just got in here because it's important to me. It's important to the communities that I represent. And so I couldn't sit idly by and not say anything. And so I have rightfully, in my mind, chastised the process, chastised the people. Because again, I think One Virginia started off with a noble goal, but then became corrupted by its own pursuit of success. And they moved their goalpost as to what success was going to be. And whether it was getting an amendment on the ballot being success, which is what I think that they measured it by, or getting the right thing through, I think that changed along the course of the narrative and of the journey. Now, I think that they start from a place where everybody says, yeah, we want to reform redistricting. I think we all agree with that. I think once you get down to the next level, which says, how do you do that? That's where we begin to diverge. And so we have an uphill battle to tell everybody why this amendment is bad and why we can come back next year in the session, do something that's going to govern the 2021 process, and then start over, pass something next year, have the election, do it again in 22, and have it ready for 2031.
Any other questions? Maureen Markham, we'll unmute you.
Yes. So, Jay, don't we already have a bill that was passed last year that was the criteria about that would govern the redistricting for 2021? I thought we had an anti-gerrymandering bill that lays out criteria and protects communities of interest and has a lot of good stuff in it that we would like to see. And that law will cover with redistricting for 2021 if the amendment fails. But if the amendment passes, it won't apply to the commission or the Supreme Court.
It will be, and that's right. And so that's your tension, right? Is that if the amendment fails, we have something in place, but if it passes, all that stuff kind of goes up in smoke. And as a Black Virginian, you're asking me to trust some white Virginians, and you said trust us for a long time, and a lot of us are rightfully skeptical because there weren't a lot of Black people at the table when all this stuff was happening. And so there, to me, does not necessarily seem to be the adequate protections in place. And look, I'll say it again, I've said it once, I'll say it many times, for an amendment that's going into the Constitution that you can't just take out with a bill the next year, it better be perfect. And it better be as circumscribed as possible, right? Everything better be in there. Because if it's not, the other side will find a way to take advantage of it and punish us.
Yeah, I don't think it's a black and white issue. I mean, I don't think the racial aspect of it is what's going to get most Virginians to oppose this amendment.
I agree. I think the more sort of powerful narrative, frankly, is that you still have politicians in the process. And I think if that's what's going to sell people, great. And I think, and I have been privy to some polling that's taken place, and I know that argument's powerful. The racial argument is also powerful, but I think for a lot of people, they said, well, we don't want politicians in there doing it for themselves and getting and sort of picking their voters. And I think once people realize that there are still 8 politicians in this process, right? That's 8 too many. And I think a lot of us would probably not be as vocally opposed if there was something in there that said there would be no politicians at all. But I can't vote for that and keep my promise to the folks of the 89th and the folks of my area by voting for something that is partisan and it's not independent.
Okay, is there another question from the audience? Wave on the screen or raise your hand or send a chat to the chat window. Any other questions? All right, well, Jay, do you want to just take 1 or 2 minutes to summarize and conclude then?
Yeah, look, thank you guys for having me. Patrick, thanks for the invitation. Look, I have been very, very vocal about where I stand. It's going to take folks like you to help us out here to share the message and educate folks as to why this isn't a good thing for Virginia. And the task becomes even more challenging because of the way that we are living now, where virtual is supposed to be in person, and you can't just go say, hey, neighbor, don't do this, or hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, whoever. And so we've got to sort of work that much harder amidst these challenging times. I do know that a lot of the committees have done the sample ballot thing. I'm speaking to the Surrey Democratic Committee tonight to urge them to adopt a no position as well. And I think that's how we're going to do this, is sort of these small circles and emanating outward, because there is a lot of noise on social media. There is a lot of noise on television. But I think once people really have an idea that this is a partisan process, it's a scary partisan process, and there aren't a lot of guardrails, they should be concerned. But I think they also got to make sure that they know that this could potentially impact Virginia for generations and in the wrong way. And so there's a lot at stake. Obviously, 2020 is important with the presidential election, but the stuff all the way at the bottom of the ballot is oftentimes even more critical and more important. And I would submit to you that this, right, is going to have a much longer effect than who's in office for the next 4 years. And so we've got to keep that in mind as we go vote for Joe Biden, but also go vote no for the amendment. So I'm happy to be here with you guys. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your engagement. If you guys want my contact information, it's online. It's the delegate account. But if you want my number, my personal email, Patrick will give it to you. I give him authorization to do so.
Right. Thank you for taking the time to join us. You're free to hang out for a while if you want, but we are going to move on to the rest of the ballot, which is very lengthy.
Yeah, you guys get on with it. I appreciate you. I'm gonna hang for a few minutes, but then I got another Zoom, and I got to do some legal work for a little while before we go to session this afternoon. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, so the next topic is the school board, and we've got two things. We've got the bond referendum, but we're also actually joined by one of our school board candidates. And Christine, do you want to just take 1 or 2 minutes to say hello to the group and talk about your campaign?
Sure thing. Sorry I'm late, y'all. We have a debate this evening, so we were working on debate prep this morning that ran a little bit long. So Lois is going to be there. It's going to be very exciting. So I hope to see all of you joining in and tuning in. So for those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, I'm Cristina Diaz-Torres. I'm one of your 2 democratically endorsed candidates for school board, alongside my colleague David Pretty. And so we're both going to be on the ballot this November. I do want to put in a shameless plug. We are hosting a joint fundraiser this weekend. I can put the link for you all in the chat in a minute. But we are going to be featuring Congressman Don Beyer and a number of our local electeds up and down all forms of government, talking about how it's important that we collaborate to make sure that schools reopen as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. If you've been following along on social media today, or if you have grandkids or nieces and nephews in the system, you know that today's been a really tough day for a lot of folks with the first day of school and some tech issues, but it's good to see that we're working through it, and we're going to figure out some good solutions to make sure that everyone can have access to the education that they deserve. So that's all I've got. If y'all have questions, happy to answer them. Or if there's anything that's on your mind, I'm happy to answer that as well.
All right. Are there any non-school bond questions? All right, then it's my pleasure to introduce Lois Koontz, who's the co-chair of the school bond campaign, which is something we do every time we have a school bond. And she's just been recently appointed as co-chair along with Miles. And why don't we turn the floor over to Lois to talk about the bond campaign.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks so much for inviting me here today. I'm sorry Miles is busy earning a living today, so he's not with us, but Bob is right. We were appointed within the week. So you're my pilot effort here. So what I'd like to do is, of course, outline the use and the mechanics of bond funding for schools in particular, and then give you the specific uses outlined for this particular fund. And I'm then happy to take any questions. As most of you are aware, the school operating budgets, of course, are used to cover basic maintenance and operating costs year over year. But when major work needs to be done, which could include replacing internal school systems or roofs or additions, significant renovations, or even new buildings, we fund those projects largely through bonds. Those are considered capital improvement and major infrastructure projects. Bond financing is not the only way we finance those projects. We also use some current revenues, our own capital reserves, and when I say our, I'm talking about APS as if it's me, but I am speaking on behalf of APS here as an advocate. We can use county funds if there are jointly funded projects. And in some cases, our projects are funded through a combination of all of those. So our bond financing is generated through the sale of general obligation bonds by Arlington County and authorized by the voters through bond referenda. So we do have a referendum on a school bond this November. So what is this bond looking to cover? There are essentially 4 buckets of things in this bond. It's smaller than what you have seen when we're building schools. We're looking to raise $52.6 million. And we're doing some things that are often, I think, hard sells. They're sort of unsexy. The first one would be our HVAC replacements. But in the time of the pandemic, I'm hoping this isn't a hard sell because air quality is a big deal. And getting all of this in line for when we do bring students back into the schools is even more critical than usual to ensure good air quality. That bucket also does include things like a covered entrance for the Heights building, one of our newest schools, which doesn't have a covered entrance, but it does house the Stratford program, which is some of our least abled students. So that total is $15.4 million. The second bucket is refreshing of older school buildings, including kitchen renovations. The kitchen renovations are specifically needed because we anticipate changes in student demographics, and I'm referring to the need to feed higher numbers of students via the free and reduced lunch program. Changing demographics throughout the system, we'll see a rise in those numbers, but also we're seeing that in some specific schools as we are moving some communities from one building to another in order to even out the spacing, the use of our buildings, the utilization of capacity. That total is $7.6 million on the bond. The capital improvement plan of the schools also allocates another $2.6 million from our capital reserves. As I mentioned, this is a piecing together funding from multiple sources. The third bucket in this bond is building envelope updates, which are primarily bringing security entrances to, I think it's 5 or 6 schools: Taylor, Gunston, Jefferson, Williamsburg, and Wakefield. This is a hardening of the exterior of the building, which allows us to lock it down should anyone try to enter. And this is considered best practices in an age of school shooters. So these are the remaining schools. This is a process that's been ongoing for a number of years. It hasn't been talked about very much because the last thing APS wanted to do was say, hey, we've got 3 secure schools. So if you want to go shoot up a school, go to any of the others. You know, we don't want to put a target on any other schools. So these are the remaining schools, and we hope to finish the security entrances at those schools this year. The final bucket, and that's $5.3 million. And the final bucket then is for planning and design costs. This is a $24 million allocation, which is a lot for planning and design, but it is a 10-year horizon on planning and design. So it would be for seats at all levels, K to 12, over the next 10 years. It's not designated for a specific building project, as we sometimes have in these bonds. But these are the soft costs that cover the preparation for and the development during major expansions, whether that's new buildings or additions or other, quite frankly. So those are the 4 buckets: the HVAC, the refreshes, the security entrances, and planning and design. And the total of that is $52.6 million that we're looking for this year in the bond. And I'm happy to take questions.
Well, the first question, which is always asked, is what is the consequence of this? And up until now, Arlington has had a AAA credit rating from 3 different credit agencies, the so-called AAA. And as I understand this, the people have talked with the bond market, and they feel that this level of borrowing will still protect our AAA rating. Is that also your understanding, Lois?
That is correct. The APS bonding capacity is framed by the county board. It's not an invention of the schools. The county has county bond capacity, which keeps us within the AAA rating. And then the county divides that out into schools and non-schools. And the adopted financial and debt management policies mean that the payments on our bond, on our borrowed funds, can't be more than 10% of, let me just get this terminology correct. Sorry, it shall not exceed 10% of general expenditures. So the payment on debt is going to stay under 10% year over year of school expenditures. And that's our debt service ratio, and that is consistent actually across the schools and the board, the county.
Yeah. The other thing that I think we ought to talk about for just 1 second is that we are in the middle of a COVID pandemic. A lot of people are hurting. Our tax receipts are down, and we don't know when they'll go back up. But in that context, one expects that the voting taxpayer public will be more conservative than they would otherwise be in past years. So wouldn't that indicate that we've got to make even more of a effort this year to sort of sell the voters on the concept of bond issues more so than in 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago?
Well, thanks, Bob. That's a great question, and I love that I'm a bond chair of 4 days now. I'm 4 days old, so I'm gonna go off script here because I don't know, I don't have anything prepared to answer that. But what I would say is that in the midst of the pandemic, again, air quality is a primary concern for all of us, and we really need are in good shape. Bob, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to comment on that?
We're always concerned about air quality. But
Yes.
pandemic doesn't change anything.
Well, I think pandemic intensifies it, and I say that as a parent. And I think you will notice that the 52.6 million is considerably lower than we have bonded for in the past. This is not, we have not committed to building anything in this. We are keeping our facilities maintained. We're making sure the roofs don't leak, that our kitchens can serve and feed the kids who are in the building, and that when we refresh an older school building, we're making sure that all of the IT is up to date, and again, that the environment is a healthy and safe one for kids. The security entrances, again, that's been an ongoing effort. This is the very tail end of a consistent push to make our schools secure so that we can lock down anyone who tries to come in with machine gun. And I think the bulk of this, I mean, a good half of this money is in planning and design. And so here I'm really going off script, but I will say that we thought we were going to add a lot of seats at the Career Center. That was a decision by the school board a number of years ago. And what happened is we went through a lengthy process with the community to figure out what would make that a reasonable facility for the number of students. And then we worked extensively with architects and engineers. And then we went back to the architects and engineers because what we found was we just couldn't do it. We can't afford what we want, and we weren't willing to settle. So we're essentially pulling back and looking to consider new and different alternatives. And so the planning funds, while certainly are not limited to this year, they really are part of a reconsideration and something of a retrenching, to be honest. We may be looking at additions at other schools instead of building at the Career Center. And I don't want to presume. I'm sure if John Chadwick were on this call, he'd be sweating bullets because I'm starting to launch into his territory. And I haven't been fully briefed by him yet, so I'm not sure what I'm not supposed to say. But
sure.
I'm
not trying to put you on the spot, but
yeah.
I sort of know the politics of this a little bit, and I can tell you that every person on this call has for many years been a good foot soldier on behalf of good government, including the Arlington schools. And if there was a year when you needed to make a little more effort, I'm talking to everybody on this phone call, a little more effort for the bonds, this might be that year because of perhaps a little more reluctance on the part of the voters in the middle of the current situation. I think that the county board and the school board have made very wise decisions on what they're putting in this bond issue, but I think we all need to sort of pull on the rope a little bit harder to make sure that things go our way on November 3rd. That's sort of the answer I was looking for, but your answer was wonderful as well.
Well,
Okay.
I think this is not some extravagant new project. This is taking care of what we have and taking care of our kids in the buildings. And so I feel strongly about it, and I hope you will join me in supporting the bond.
Yes. Does anyone else have a question for Lois? Okay, well, we want to thank you. You're welcome to stay on, but we will move forward. Our next speaker was Jay Wynn from the Friends of Arlington Park. Is Jay on the phone, or I don't see him on our list? Why don't I switch to the application again, and we'll just go over the rest of these. So the parks bond is probably about half of what it's been in previous years, and it's for a few projects in the overall capital improvement plan of that. Community infrastructure is $7.4 million. We also have two others that are much bigger. One is the metro, and again, the metro has a formula for spreading capital investment across all the jurisdictions that are part of WMATA, and our share of that borrowing is $29.9 million, and that's on the bond issue, a referendum on the ballot. And the other one, which is almost as big as schools, is our stormwater system. We've been renovating the sewage treatment plant and installing separate stormwater sewers from wastewater sewers, and we're going to borrow $50 million for that. The final constitutional amendment that it's worth talking about for just 1 second is that 100% disabled veterans who have vehicles in Virginia pay the same car tax that everybody else pays. And this would give them exemptions for one vehicle per veteran. And this is an amendment to the Constitution because right now the Constitution requires all to be taxed equally. So any deviation from that has to be done as a constitutional amendment rather than a statute. And it is on the ballot. It passed with broad-based bipartisan support in the legislature, and the Arlington Democrats have voted to recommend the voters vote yes on that constitutional amendment. So that's the main thing. The other thing that's on the ballot is the people, and we have contested races in every category. So it's very important to note that. Excuse me for a second here. Okay, it's very important to note that all of these are contested seats. Even though we have 2 school board candidates, there is an independent candidate running in that seat. They're like a Mark Warner for U.S. Senate. There is an independent candidate for county board. So all of these, and our wonderful Congressman Don Beyer does have a Republican opponent. So this year, all ballot positions are going to be contested. We are expecting Jocelyn Garay to join us from Senator Warner's campaign in just a minute. We'll give her a minute to sign on, but I do want to emphasize.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Okay, well.
Yes, I am.
Didn't know that. Why don't you, I'll turn over the microphone to you. You can tell us the exciting things that Senator Warner is doing in his reelection campaign, what we can do to help, and maybe you can also talk about the coordinated campaign for just a second.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here with y'all. So I'd love to, chat a little bit about what the senator's been up to. As you all know, this is a campaign that none of us really planned to have. So he's been very, very busy up on the Hill. I know y'all know about the PPP program. I know that last T is the program, but I always add it in there anyway. That was really his brainchild and what he's been working on. And now he's really working really hard on the Hill, trying to find ways to expand that, because we know the money didn't really get to a lot of the folks that we really wanted it and really needed that money. So he's got a new bill that he's working on. It's called the Jobs and Neighborhoods Investment Act, and it'll give tons of money to CDFIs, and it'll focus heavily on Black and brown small businesses, along with a few other things. So that's what's got him busy up there. He's back this week. They're hoping to pass another relief bill. So, normally, as you all very know, we would have had tons of time with him on the campaign, and he would have done whatever I said. But these are different times. So he spent a lot of time on the Hill, but now we're getting him a little more time with him. So we just wrapped up a couple of weeks of state travel. He did a handful of very small, very safe in-person events to really hear from community leaders and find out what he could be doing better, and how folks are feeling and stuff like that. We're going to do a little bit more of that, but right now, he's going to kind of go back to doing Zooms and things like that. So if y'all have not been on a Zoom with the senator, I want to make sure you get on one and you have time to ask some questions and get some FaceTime with him. We did a few things for Labor Day, so we're going to continue doing that, and we're going to continue trying to find ways to diversify and get people excited and involved. So ways you can get involved in our campaign. As you all know, we're doing everything from home. So we're doing a lot of phone banking and a lot of texting. At some point we thought that maybe we could get some folks on the doors at some point in time. I don't know if that's really going to happen. It's not looking too great. We want to make sure everyone is safe. We might coordinate some lit drops at some point in time, but all of that and all of our volunteer efforts will be done through the coordinated campaign. So if y'all go to markwarnerva.com, click get involved, that'll automatically take you to to being involved with our coordinated campaign, and it'll kind of put you on our list to get involved, you know, with all the other stuff we've got going on. So we're going to be doing a lot of, you know, kind of bigger scale events with the senator. He wants to make sure he gets out in front of and is able to talk to as many people as possible. So if you've got any other suggestions or anything like that for me, please let me know. We also have yard signs in. I know lots of folks want yard signs. So if you haven't gotten one and you need one, please reach out. I'll be sure to make sure y'all have my contact information. And, you know, we can make sure we get you a yard sign. I'm always here, happy to take any suggestions, comments, concerns. I know we said maybe folks would be able to ask some questions. So I really want to make sure we leave enough time for that. Happy to answer any questions folks have on the campaign, kind of what we see going forward. I know I haven't been able to, I forgot to mention, we've got a few debates coming up against our opponent, Daniel Gade. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be, you know, publicizing those as well. So please, if you've got any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you for those remarks. Do you foresee that the entire campaign will remain completely virtual between now and Election Day, given the COVID situation?
Right now, that is what we're planning on. Unless there's some, you know, big change, we really thought things would look differently where we are now than what they look like. So again, he'll be doing in October. He'll do a handful of very small, socially distanced, in-person events. We're still building those out and figuring out what they'll look like. But for now, yeah, I think we're also taking, you know, Biden is really taking the lead on this. So if Biden doesn't want folks out knocking on doors, we don't want to do that either. So yeah, I think for the most part, we're going to be doing a lot of Zoom and a lot of virtual stuff.
Does anyone else have a question for Jocelyn?
I do.
Yeah, yes, Joan, go ahead.
Has the senator's opponent been doing a lot more advertising, let's say, and maybe TV further south in the state? Because I had to look up who his opponent actually is the other day because I just hadn't seen anything, which didn't sadden me, but it surprised me.
No, I think it's the same kind of all around. He doesn't have much money. He hasn't been able to raise much money. So he doesn't have, you know, we did go up on TV, so y'all should see our ads. We're kind of up everywhere, yes. Starting, I believe, was the end of last week. And so he went up on TV this week, if I'm not mistaken. But he's not, you know, he doesn't have much name recognition. He hasn't run or won any office previously. So he's got an uphill battle, you know, in folks learning about him and learning who he is.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Lois.
So I give Mr. Gade a little bit of credit. If you're interested, he will be at Civic Federation's Zoom meeting this evening. Unfortunately, Mr. Warner will not be joining us. So Mr. Gade will have the whole floor for the Senate panel. So he's making the effort, even though he doesn't have a big, you know, pot of money, I guess. He's reaching out and very eager to get to know folks in Arlington. I guess Mr. Warner feels that he's already well known, no doubt. But anyway, Mr. Gade will be there. So since Mr. Warner isn't going to be with us tonight, I'm sort of interested in maybe taking an opportunity to ask one or two questions we might have asked him. One has to do with NEA funding. And I guess NEA funding has been steadily and consistently bipartisan, despite Mr. Trump's call for termination. So does Mr. Warner have a position on the future of the National Endowment for the Arts?
Well, you know, a couple things. I don't think Senator Warner thinks he's very well known anywhere. You know, for those of y'all who were around in 2014, you know, that was a really close race. It's unfortunate he can't make it. I wish he could be everywhere. He wishes he could be everywhere. I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, so I don't want to give an incorrect answer. But I will definitely get you my contact information, and I will be sure to get you an answer.
Okay, there are one or two others if nobody's got burning questions here that we were interested in. One is he supporting ending gerrymandering through this this constitutional amendment or through some other way? What is his position?
I don't believe he's taking a position on the constitutional amendment. Again, something that I can definitely get you an answer on. You know, the senator is a big believer in kind of letting folks, you know, the people of Virginia decide what they'd want to do. I could be mistaken, but I don't believe that's the case. But I will definitely get you an answer.
Okay. I guess maybe rather than run through a bunch of questions, I would ask that if he can't be with us, maybe you can be with us tonight and take note of some of the questions and try to get some of the answers out to us in Arlington. Because the Arlingtonians we had 15 questions. We've narrowed down to probably about a half dozen that we'll be able to get to tonight. And we feel that those are the burning questions in Arlington. So we'd love to hear what Mr. Warner has to say.
I'm not sure if I can be on tonight, but I am happy to get you the answers to any questions you'd like. You know, we're more than happy, willing. I can work with my colleagues to make sure we get you some good, you know, fleshed out answers that you can share with folks. And again, I'm sorry he can't be there. I know he's sorry he can't be there too.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else in the audience have questions? All right. Well, I think then we've gone through the agenda. I'm sorry that Jay Wind, who had said he would come, somehow either got disconnected or didn't call in. But the Friends of the Arlington Parks obviously support the Parks bonds. So you should remember that as well. And our next meeting is on the second Tuesday of October. We don't have any speakers lined up yet, but I always welcome your suggestions, and it should be a very important meeting. It's the last one before the elections. And we do deeply appreciate everyone taking the time out to spend their lunch hour with us. So with no further remarks, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.